Obviously, it's a beautiful Seattle September evening because we only have this many people who bother to go up. And thank you for coming anyway. We had a great presenter tonight. The title of his talk is Leading Change from the QA Team, which is kind of a cool concept, I always think. And so I'll introduce, actually this is a pre-PNSQC talk. Who's going to be speaking again in Portland. Brian Goodrow's not here tonight, but Greg, we have some giveaways back there at the end of the bar. PNSQC is a great conference, and we participate every year. And it's worth going down if you have the time or means to do it. So I'll leave your credentials to yourself. Okay. Yeah. But John Ruberto from Concur. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And thanks for the gifts. Those little screens, those little blue badges, they are so cool. You stick them on the back of your phone, and when you get like smudge, you take those off and you wipe it off, and it's clean as can be. They're the handiest thing. Grab one on your way out.
Yeah. And then I'll also remember we're hiring.
Hey, Brian. So you just mentioned your name, and if you want to say something about the upcoming PNSQC conference where John's speaking,
sure.
Or if you want to do it later, either way's cool.
Either way, since he's already interrupted, I'm going to go on the board of directors for the Software Quality Conference. I got t-shirts here. If you're even thinking about going to the conference, come grab one. We're going to promote it. It's a great one, October 17th, 18th, 19th. Great embedded speaker lineup. And we're going to be hosting a lot of video content this time around, so it'll be accessible, but I encourage you to get involved in networking. Anyways, more online. There's stuff all over the place. Don't want to disrupt. That's going to be a great conference. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, and by the way, those are really cool t-shirts. They're super lightweight, super comfortable.
I have.
Cool.
Great logo.
Come on in. All right, so thank you guys for coming. So again, my name is John Ruberto. I work at Concur. We're over in Bellevue. And we're in travel and expense management. A number of you use our apps for your travel and expenses. Now, I'd love to hear what makes you happy about the app and any opportunities for us to improve the app too. So as we go on tonight, I'd like to get your feedback. What I want to share today is leading change from the quality. And the first thing, before I really get started, I'm going to reference a number of models and tools and websites. I'll show a video. The links to all of these things are on this bit.ly link. So if you see something interesting and want to refer to it, it's available on this bit.ly link. So help yourself at any time. But before, let me start with a story. And this story is, I want you to imagine a fisherman in a river, and he has a couple of fishing buddies with him. And he's out there fishing one beautiful morning, and the peace and serenity of the river is interrupted by some commotion. A guy is drowning, thrashing in the water, floating down the river. So the fisherman drops his gear and runs out and saves the guy. They bring him up on shore, revive the drowning person, and the guy's thankful. And so everybody celebrates. They're happy to save their life. Well, then there's some more commotion. Another guy is in the water. And so they run out and they save the second guy. And the same thing, they're happy. And guess what? These things always happen in threes. So a third guy comes in, and they go out and save him. And so 3 guys saved. And now what happens? A 4th guy comes down the river. Well, our hero walks away. And everybody and his buddies are going, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm going upstream to find out how people are falling in the river. So what we want to do is quality is often we're dealing with the bugs, the people floating down the river. And as leaders, what we want to do is be that person that's going to go upstream to go solve the root problem. And often that means changing the behavior of people outside of your direct control, out of your direct team. And that's what this talk is about, is some tactics and strategies behind how to initiate and make that change happen. So I was interviewed one time for a web article, and one of the questions came up was, tell me about your title. And I was calling myself a quality leader. And the question was, why aren't you the test manager? You manage the test group in this team. Why are you calling yourself the quality leader? So that was a good question. So when you're focused on testing, you're focused on testing. When your quality is your brand and you're thinking about quality, you're thinking about the entire life cycle from, what are we going to build all the way through end of life support. So it's the full life cycle. So I'd like to include quality instead of test because it's a more expansive brand. And then what about leader? Well, as a manager, what you're doing is you're organizing the work. Versus as a leader, you're responsible for influencing the outcomes. So it's a different mindset in terms of, okay, I'm going to apply this process, take this person, and solve this task, versus leadership is about leading the team and influencing others to build high quality stuff. So I like to think about myself as a quality leader as opposed to a test manager for these reasons. Now, moving into the test, into the change leadership space. Mr. Cotter, I think Brett Cotter, wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about why do changes fail? Why do organization change efforts fail? And he came up with 8 reasons why they fail. I'm not going to read all 8 of them to you, but what I want to highlight is the first 4 are all about building the case for change. So when I talk about leading change, the first step is going to be building the case for change. Getting people excited about your change. So not establishing a great enough sense of urgency, not creating a powerful enough guiding coalition, lacking a vision and under-communicating the change by a factor of 10. Half of the reasons why change efforts fail are about building the case for change. This is all the preparatory work before you actually start to implement your change. And you know it's true because he wrote it in the Harvard Business Review, so it's some credibility. All right, another research around change is called the change curve. And there's a couple of links to 2 different models. This one is called the DREC curve, which stands for denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment. A lot of the change leadership thought processes around this change curve. And the curve is people go in to the denial and resistance. They want to resist change. They deny there's a problem before they start to explore and then finally commit to the change. And so a lot of the communication is about narrowing that dip when you go from the denial and resistance and try to minimize the trough. You'll see a curve that shows changes where you dip in productivity for a while and then you finally come up and you're realizing you're at a higher level after you start. That's the change curve. You want to narrow that change curve. But what's interesting to me about the change curve is where it comes from. It's derived from something called the Kubler-Ross model. How many have heard about the Kubler-Ross model? So this model describes the emotions that people go through when a loved one dies. So here we want to make a change. We might want to institute a static analysis into our process. And we're treating it like somebody's going to pass away or somebody has passed away. So the changes are so hard that the models were built around how to deal with someone who passes away.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Is there any statistics that show the sustainability of change when the curve is lessened? For instance, just because the curve lessens, what about the sustainability of that change? Is there a correlation with taking more time to let it cement and value in and then measuring how sustainable that change is on? Do they correlate?
That's an excellent question, and I will research that before PSQC. Thank you.
All right.
I really don't know, but what
You can see the argument there.
Yes, I can.
want to know that.
And I don't know about statistics, but I can see a just a gut feel. Getting to that end point of the change curve is about getting the teams to commit and start to implement and see the value and benefit. So I would think that the quicker you can get there, the more likely it's going to stick because of that reason, because you're getting the value quicker.
Got it.
And I could almost see the corollary. And there is a definite corollary when people hit this resistance and the productivity is actually lower. Well, you're going to get a lot of, well, that was a stupid idea, and then you abandon at that point. So my bet is the statistics will prove that out in a large part because it will factor in the abandonment of the changes at the low point.
Got it.
A great question. Thanks for that. All right, so the rest of the talk I'm going to move into the model of how to lead change. And what I'm going to do is illustrate the model with specific examples from two changes that I led. The first one is a process and SLDC change. I was working for a company that was building financial applications, and we were releasing on every 6 weeks, and we wanted to move that to a monthly cycle. So we had to make a bunch of changes in the way we do our development process and our software lifecycle to be able to sustainably release at a faster pace. We didn't want to just put a lot of pressure and whips and ask people to work overtime. We wanted to do it smartly. And the second is a technology change where we introduced static analysis as part of our development methodology. And we added static analysis checks to our builds. And so we had about 100 developers, and we had to change a lot of behaviors and get buy-in on this change. So before I really jump into the model, I did lie. I have one slide about the roles. And so there are two roles I just want to highlight. One is the change leader. And that's what we're talking about right now, is the person who leads the process of making the change and drives the organization into leading the change. There's another supporting role, which is very important, is the change agent. And a change agent is someone who's going to be supporting your change. They're going to be a visible person who's going to say, yes, that's a great idea, I'm working on it. They're going to actively be part of your prototyping. They're going to give you great feedback, and they're going to be positively supported. I will touch a little bit on like naysayers and those people who don't want to make a change a little bit later. But first I wanted to show this video. Again, this video is available on YouTube, and the link is in that bit.ly page.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut, and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers, because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So I love that. So cool. As you're leading change, as you're the shirtless guy, and I won't take off my shirt for the rest of the conversation, you do want to cultivate your first followers because you're not a leader until you actually have a follower. And it's very important to get those people that are going to be thought leaders within their communities as well to be your first followers. So definitely you want to invest in the relationship and the time with those followers. All right, here's the 4 steps. Very simple process. Build a case for change, plan the change, test the change, and then roll it out and make adjustments. Very simple model. And let me illustrate each step. So first, for building the case for change, you really need to identify the need. And there are many different avenues, and we get a lot of information every day about the problems that we're incurring. And so they're really going to help us drive the need. So retrospectives are a great place to find a need for something to change. Let me just do a quick poll. How many do regular retrospectives where you're getting the same problems over and over again? Does that happen? Yeah, no, I've worked in places where that happens. And those just get tedious. It's like, why even have a retrospective? We can almost publish the minutes before the meeting. Definitely, if you see that happening, you want to embrace, just take one thing and make that happen and fix that one thing. Benchmarking other organizations. So we go to conferences, we go to meetups like this, we see what's happening in other teams, and some of those practices may be good for us to emulate and take on. Defect escapes and escalations. Having angry customers, I know it happens. That's usually a good indication that something needs to be fixed and something needs to change. So use those as a lever. I know there's a political argument, sometimes it's phrased as never waste a crisis. So you notice whenever there's any type of crisis, there's usually a call for new laws to do different things. People are leveraging these escalations and these issues to change the laws into the way that they see fit. Industry trends and best practices, again, benchmarking other teams, ideas from your teams, experiments and innovations. A lot of your team members are going to have some really great ideas. Hey, we should do something different. We should go do, this. Root cause analyses. Whenever we have a problem and we go study the root cause, they should be actionable. And then risk analysis is another area. If you've ever done an FMEA, you get a lot of information about what could go wrong, what's going to be detected simply. those FMEAs and those risk analyses should drive you to look at, hey, how can we change our system to either lower the severity of the risk, the likelihood, or speed the time of detection if something does go wrong. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to identify things that need to be changed. So here's the example for static analysis. We were getting a lot of bugs found during system test and regression test. And what we did was we added a field to our bug tracking system to just note the category of the cause of that problem. What we found was, and we had about a dozen different categories, about 70% of the issues were found because they were coding errors. So they were either missing code, incorrect code, improper exception handling, those types of things. So what I did was I took that data and I met with the developers. I said, hey, what can we do differently to get the coding errors out of the system before we commit to system test? And we brainstormed, and I remember I actually did this in India. We ended up with 2 answers, and do better at unit testing and do better at code review. I said, well, I didn't fly 2,500 miles for 25,000 miles for this. It's pretty obvious answers. So we looked at the 3rd item on our list, which was let's start doing static analysis. And that was something that we weren't doing before. And so we wanted to see if there was a good static analysis tool that would help us easily find these problems for us without having a lot of false positives. So now, building the case for change, the next thing that's very important is to think about your audience. And your audience is going to be concerned about different things. So if you have developers and your testers, they're going to be primarily, at least in my experience, really focused on their productivity and the productivity of their team. They're not going to want to do a bunch of process work just for process sake, is what they'll call it. Whatever they do, they want it to be more efficient for them to get their job done. Product managers and product owners, they tend to look at customer satisfaction, but also feature velocity. Thanks for the air. Feels good. They're looking at delivering on feature roadmaps. So they want the features to come out at a quicker pace. So usually feature velocity is something that resonates with product owners. Project managers and scrum masters, in my book, they tend to want predictability. They want you to be able to define what your plan is and be able to stick to that plan. So if you frame your arguments in terms of, hey, we're going to have better predictability, we're going to be able to get through our testing cycles quicker, whatever, those arguments may resonate with your project managers. And then your leaders are looking for all of the above, and probably also coupled with some financial rewards. They want speed and also efficiency with lower costs. Now, your mileage may vary with the individuals that you're working with, but what you want to do is you want to listen to them and think through what is important to this person, and then learn to speak the language that they're speaking. All right, building a burning platform. I had a boss who used to say, what's your burning platform for change? And we always had to articulate to him, okay, this is why we're making this change. And it was just a phrase he used, build what's your burning platform. And it took me a little research to find out what he meant by that. Imagine if you're working on an oil platform and you have your status quo, which is you're on the oil platform, and now it catches on fire. You have a very compelling reason to change your status quo, right? You're either going to be burned up or you're going to be in the water. It's very clear that you need to make a change. And so what he was asking me to do was really refine the argument to make it very clear that we need to make a change. And so I've learned to use this metaphor to really think through how can I articulate the problem in a way that is going to really drive people to make a change. And so here are some of the tips that have worked for me. So the first is, again, communicating in the language of your audience, but also don't talk about your idea specifically. Talk about the vision behind your idea. And don't talk about the features of your idea. Talk about the benefits that your idea is going to generate. I'm going to give you a few examples. So I've given this talk in Silicon Valley, and there's a law where it's mandatory to have this photo. So I'll comply with the law. But, and I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name, but not his, Steve Jobs. There was someone who came over, I think it was from Real Player, to join Apple. And he had the idea, Steve, you need to build an MP3 player with a hard drive. And Steve said, okay, that's great. But he reframed it. He didn't call it an MP3 player with a hard drive. He said, I want 1,000 songs in my pocket. Now, this is a better visual, right? You can imagine a vision of 1,000 songs in your pocket. But this starts to also sell the benefit of having 1,000 songs in your pocket. I can carry my entire music with me wherever I go. And but what's also important about this is the vision is what you want to accomplish. The MP3 player with a hard drive lists out some specific technologies which may or may not work. So there's other technologies that you could use to deliver on the promise of 1,000 songs in my pocket. So if you talk about MP3 and hard drive, you may get some electrical engineer to tell about power density and how that's impossible, and then your argument's kind of muddled. But if you keep it at, hey, we want to deliver 1,000 songs, and you start talking about, then you take the next step, which we'll talk a little bit more, is experimentation. What you may find is you need to tweak your technology choices. You may need to change your underlying tools or technology, the thing that you're trying to bring, but you still want to target your vision. So when we talked about faster release cycles, going from 6 weeks to monthly release cycles, the feature was faster release cycles, but the benefit was that we were delivering were quicker feedback from our customers. So we were kind of in a world where you would do some planning, you would do some implementation, you would release it, so that's 6 weeks, probably another 2 weeks before we had enough volume to get meaningful customer feedback. So from the minimum time from when we had an idea until we knew it was successful was 2 months. So by releasing on a monthly basis, we were able to squeeze a bunch of that time out. So we were able to get that information maybe in 5 or 6 weeks instead of 2 months. So the compelling reason for faster release cycles was faster feedback from our customers. Static analysis is part of the build. I mean, that sounds boring when I just said it. I saw you guys, your energy level went down when I said that sentence. But when we talked about an automated code review buddy with the developers, that resonated better. And what that really meant was when we started thinking about the requirements behind how we're going to bring static analysis in, we didn't think about a tool that's going to help us managers get a bunch of data to go beat up the engineers with. What we wanted to do was give a tool to help the engineers build better software. And so that vision also helped us refine how we were going to design this practice. And it also helped the engineers know that, hey, here's a tool that's going to help you rather than hinder you. Questions? Cool, thank you. All right, next is plan and change. So communication is key. I didn't mention that already. One good area, you want to make sure that your change is factored into your organization's goals. So in where I work, we have annual goals and we also have quarterly goals. And so the changes that I'm leading, I work with my peers, the development directors, I work with our VP to make sure that big changes that we're trying to drive are listed in their goals as well. Not just my goals, but also my boss's goals. And what that does is that helps send that message that this is an important change. So definitely I would recommend you talk to your leaders and your peers and stakeholders and get them to include your ideas and your changes into their goals. More communication, one-on-one sessions, team meetings, and all hands. For leading the change on accelerating the development life cycle, I actually had about 40 different one-on-ones with individuals who were impacted by the change or who had to make some portions of the change. And I did that on a one-on-one basis with them because I wanted to have a very frank and open conversation, especially with the folks who were naysayers. The folks who didn't want to make the change, they were giving me feedback on why this change is going to be is a stupid change, really. And so I would be able to probe and ask in an open way and say, okay, well, why? Why is this going to be a problem? And eventually get to the core of what they were worried about. And so then I was able to, when I built the plan, was able to factor in their concerns into the planning. And I'll show you the tool that I use to communicate that back out in a second. And I do remember, I almost hesitate to tell this story, but I remember I was a naysayer at one point on the change that there was my boss wanted to make. And he was launched in a meeting, and I brought up, hey, this isn't going to work, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. And I kind of got the vibe and actually the words from, hey, you're not being a team player, you're blah, blah, blah. It became more of a personal attack rather than attacking the message. And then I think I remember I was a little bit more adamant about the objections, not because I wanted to get that communication clear, but what I realized, I wasn't communicating with him. I was communicating to everybody else who was watching this conversation. And I was thinking that I was standing up for them and what their concerns were. And I think he was doing the same thing. He was telling them to not follow me and not think about me in his change. So I just clearly remember that. It was a very painful discussion, and I vowed to never do that again. And that's why I always lean towards, I want to really get at the reasons why people are resisting change and want to really get to the core so that when we do lead the change, we can do it in a way that's compatible. The team meetings. So again, on this change, what I did was I talked to all of my peers, the development directors, and just asked to get in their staff meeting. And so about every month, I would be in the development leaders' staff meeting, talking to all the managers, and just give an update on where we are with this change and some of the feedback. Here are the concerns from the folks, and just what we're doing about this concern. Here are the opportunities. Here's the state of the experiments we've been running. Here's the state of these improvements. So be very transparent about where we are in driving the change. And then at all hands meetings, I would give an update to the entire org. And again, this was a little bit about having the boss give me the 5 minutes of time to give an update. What he was sending a message to everybody was, this is important, and we're going to support this change. Identify people who are impacted by the change. So here's your change agents, your first follower. And find the passionate defenders of the status quo. So you'll find that out in your one-on-ones and your meetings. And then get one-on-one with the passionate defenders of the status quo, and then ask them some positive-oriented questions. What needs to change to make this vision a reality? So again, click it up one notch away from your technology choices and your specific ideas, and talk about the vision, and say, how can we make this vision a reality? What's worrying you? What do we need to preserve? So often they're worried about, hey, if we go faster, one example, the support team, one thing that they always valued was we had a 2-hour demo of all the features before we did a release. And they were adamant they didn't want the acceleration of the life cycle to remove that meeting out of the life cycle because that's where they got their information. So we made a note, we made sure that we weren't going to skip that important step. And then what worries you is another great question to ask the naysayers. All right, go. Yes.
Oh, sorry. On the previous slide, the what worries you. What were some of the other things you heard that were especially challenging for you to address? It's like, were there other concerns that were really challenging, like you had to reach to try to assure that it was going to work?
Yeah, it's a great example. So on the accelerating the life cycle, one of them was, I'll give you an example for each. One of the accelerating life cycle, one of the reasons why it took us 2 weeks to do system testing after code complete. And a large part of that was we had a lot of features coming in late. And the reasons we had those features coming in late was because some VP or somebody said, hey, this feature must go out in this release. And release 37, you know, your ass is on the line if this feature doesn't go out. And so people were worried about that behavior would still be in the system, and yet we would take away all of the slack time that we had in the schedule. So that was one that was very difficult, and I said, okay, and I had to talk to the leaders. I said, if we're going to make this change, if you're going to get the benefit of the monthly cycles, if the features are coming in late, you're waiting until the next month. So the good news is you're early for the next release. You know, I tried to make a joke like that. The other one on the static analysis, we had several engineers who had a bad taste from previous static analysis tools that gave lots of false positives. And also they got beat up on a lot of, you know, you run a tool they haven't run for a while, it's going to come up with 10,000 errors. And you go, okay, what do I do now? And so we needed to factor those things into the tool selection and also the process in which we use the defects.
So tell me if you get to this later, but what was the percentage of the defects found after you got the static analysis working?
Oh,
from 70% originally.
Yeah, I do have a great thing. Can I save that for later? I have a great
yes,
chart.
yes.
My
Okay.
favorite chart in my whole life.
All right.
Is later in this graph.
All right.
Which addresses that.
All right.
And other questions, please. All righty. So a great tool that I found for communicating. Okay, so it did a lot of talking with folks and got their concerns and found out what needs to change. And so a great way to feed back that information is a tool called the goals grid. Now the goals grid, like so many things that management consultants come up with, is a 2x2 grid, right? So you put your variables on 2 dimensions and you plot it in these quadrants. The goals grid has the 2 dimensions are things that are desirable and undesirable, and things that you already have and things that you don't have. So the things that are desirable and you don't have, you want to achieve them. Things that you are desirable and you already have them, you want to preserve, so you want to keep those. Undesirable and you don't have, you want to avoid, and then finally you want to eliminate the bad stuff that you already have. So organizing your thoughts and your feedback in this type of format really helps communicate what we're doing. We're going to be mindful to keep those meetings that you value. We're going to avoid those behaviors that you're fearing. And so here's the actual goals grid that I used for the acceleration. So one of the things we realized to get from 2 weeks of system test down to 1 week or less is we had to have a firm code complete milestone. Meaning when we said we're done, we're really done. It's not, oh yeah, but we got 3 more features that are coming in over the next 3 or 4 days. So we put that in the desirable. That was a very key thing we had to achieve. I mentioned before the demos with the support team before the release is over in the preserve category, something that we couldn't drop. The avoid, the big one was keeping the same practices, only compressing the time and forcing people to work overtime. That was the biggest prevailing fear that people had. that we try to take 6 weeks of work and get it done in 4 weeks. So they were very worried about that. So by feeding that back and feeding the fears back, and so we're going to avoid that and ask them specifically, call that out. If you see any of that behavior, shout. We'll go stamp on that. And then lastly, this feature must release on this date kind of mindset. And we had a bunch of instabilities and other efficiencies that we also had to get out of the system in order to make it in 2 weeks. So coming back to communication. Did I mention communication is important?
Yeah. You didn't communicate that.
I didn't communicate that? Well, let me give you another example. How many people are familiar with McDonald's? You know where the nearest McDonald's is to? Probably to this location. Yeah, you just pointed to it. You know the closest McDonald's to your office and to your home. You know what's on their menu. You know what it's going to taste like. You know what it costs. And you know what you're going to feel like after you eat it. You have a very high awareness of McDonald's. And yet they still spend literally $1 billion a year on advertising. So it's one feeds the other. The high level of communication by the McDonald's Corporation feeds your high awareness. So I want you to think about that next time that you hesitate on sending your second status report out about your change in a month. I have been guilty of that, and I know many of engineers are guilty of this, where you say, well, I sent out the report 3 weeks ago. It's on email. Once you send, people need to hear multiple times. They need to see it multiple times. They probably need to see it in different formats. Some will see it in writing. Some may want to see it on Slack. Some may want to hear it verbally. Some may want to watch a video, like a dancing guy video. There's many different ways of communicating, and the McDonald's Corporation are obviously pros at it, knowing how much awareness we have. All right, so you have built your case for change. You've done your planning, so you know what you're going to change, you know what you're going to keep. You've communicated often on what your change is, what the plan is, why you're doing it. Now it's time to test your change. And so the scientific method, I know all of you guys know it. One thing I do want to emphasize, coming back to our vision and our idea, is your idea is your hypothesis that it's going to solve the problem or it's going to implement your vision. So you don't really know yet, not until you try it. It's you believe, you may have high faith that it's going to do it. So you want to think about the scientific process and start testing your hypothesis. So first you want to develop your testable predictions. Then you want to gather data, maybe form an experiment, gather some data to really evaluate, is your change or is your idea correct? And then refine, either pivot, or refine your idea, maybe change your technology, maybe you learn that, hey, this is working out. But almost always you have some tweaks you need to make. So here are the main testable predictions for the two changes. For the faster release, as I mentioned before, we needed to have this firm code complete milestone in order to complete regression test and system test in 1 week. I remember asking the folks, hey, what if we just stuck with the same build? We didn't take daily builds, and just by magic, somebody waved a magic wand. How long would it take us to get through all the testing? Well, it was about 6 or 7 hours. The 2 weeks came from all of the churn, the change, and the defects, and getting fixes in, and the doubt, and the retesting. So we believed if we had a very firm milestone, we could actually get through the testing and all of the rework and retesting in a week or less. So it seemed like a legitimate change. So what we did was we designed the experiment. We still had 6 weeks between for a release milestone. But we said, okay, we're going to do the testing in only 1 week. So we literally had a week of slack. And we're going to try out the new milestone. So we communicated to everybody, here's the new milestone, here's what we're doing. And we started behaving as though we were on the 4-week cycle. And what we found out was not everybody got the memo, and not everybody conformed to that. There were still some late changes coming in. It got better, so instead of a full 10 working days, we got it down to like 7 or 8 working days. But what we realized was we needed some extra tools and methodology to help the team stay honest, if you will. So we ended up putting locks on change control. So in order to get your change in, you had to have the release manager give you specific approval as opposed to implicit approval. And that really helped out, help people get their changes in before the deadline. The next one is static analysis. In order to make this work, we had to believe that there was a tool out there that was actually useful, that gave us meaningful, valid results, that truly attacked the types of software bugs that we're finding, and had minimal false positives. So this was a little bit more straightforward of an experiment. You got a summer intern, used Google Foo to find out, or Bing Foo, if anybody's from Microsoft here, and got the list of tools and said, okay, have at it. And he ended up doing analysis on about a dozen different tools that summer and gave a nice report. What we found out was there are actually 2 tools that work very nicely together. We had a matrix of all the defects that we knew about and which tools found which defect. And we could see, wow, this one and this one, this, and this, but this one caught those defects. So we ended up implementing 2 tools in our system instead of 1. And so that was some pretty useful information. And that also helped us avoid the 10 tools that didn't work very well. All right, so you've communicated the vision, communicated your plan, you've done your experiments, you're comfortable, now it's time to launch. And guess what happens? Chaos. So I love this picture. This is in Sweden. It was called Dagen H. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Swedish. In 1967, they literally switched from driving on the right-hand side of the road to the left. This was something that was in works, and they did all the communication. They had logos, they had commercials, street signs for years, and everybody was prepared for this day, and yet it was still a chaos. But what did they do? They persevered. And it didn't take very long for people to come and catch up and learn to drive on the other side of the road. So my advice to you, when you start to hit this fluff, things will go wrong. Be persistent. You also want to actively seek out risks. People may be seeing the risks and may not be, some will be very vocal with the risks and tell you, yeah, I told you this is stupid. But many others may not want to bother you with some of those problems. You want to actively seek them out. You also want to be open with your communication. You say, hey, this didn't go so well. We're going to work on tweaking this again, and I'd love to get your ideas on how we can make this better. And ask for feedback. Ask positive feedback. How can we improve this plan? Now, here's my favorite graph of all time. So, static analysis. When we first turned on the tool, we were finding over 200 bugs a month with the tool, about 225. And by the end of the 6th month, we were finding less than 100 per month. Now, we had more developers. We were writing more code after 6 months later. This was a growing enterprise. And we were finding fewer defects with this tool. And these are new defects that were introduced. So we're doing static analysis on the daily build. So what it was scanning were the code that was checked in the previous day. So what was happening was the developers were learning how to write more resilient, better code because they were getting that immediate feedback from the tool that says, hey, you didn't protect from for null pointer exception here. You didn't check for null before dereference. So that's why I really love this. This is a real example of defect prevention because the tool in the beginning found a lot of errors quickly and efficiently, but towards the end it was helping the developers learn to write better code. So I think this addresses, we cut the number of issues we found. We're finding fewer and fewer. Oh yeah, here's the other one. There were 15% fewer crashes in production after we introduced this as well.
How about the other defects? The defects detected by in-house or by customers? Is there a line for the number of defects?
I don't have that here, but yeah, that did get better. Yeah, because we had more time to work on more tests and fixing the other issues as well, because these crashes were prevented.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, summary. Build your burning platform is the most important part of this process. So in a lot of changes I've driven that have failed, I've jumped right into, hey, here's my idea. We're going to go make this happen. Without bringing people along about why we need to make the change and what's the vision behind the change. Jump right into the implementation. Speak the language of your stakeholders, articulate your vision. Here's one, be in love with the problem, not your solution. So often we'll have an idea. Hey, I'm going to bring this tool in that's going to really solve the problem. But you want to take a step back and not be as emotionally attached to the change you're driving, your specific idea, but you want to be emotionally attached to the vision. You want to be emotionally attached to 1,000 songs in your pocket, not an MP3 technology. Separate the two in your mind. I won't mention communication and persist when it gets difficult. So that's the summary. You can get my contact information. I do work at Concur over across the river? The lake. The lake. So we are hiring. If you're interested, you can check our website for the open positions or talk to me. I'd love to. And I want to open up any questions. Yes, sir.
How important a role, if you have a larger organization, do you think developing some of those relationships with people you'll have to get on board later plays in helping get them on board down the road? Do you think that's an important piece of what you need to do?
Absolutely, yeah. As a matter of fact, speaking of hiring, one of the interview questions that we ask is, how do you build relationships with people before you need to interact with them? It's called building strategic relationships. You want to be able to at least know someone to be able to interact with them before you need their help. So absolutely, take people out for coffee and really get to know them before you ask them their help in implementing the change. Yes?
So, about being quality leader, and I really like that title change, because test manager sounds really Dilbert and very boring, and negative too, because test is, a lot of people still think this test is about finding bugs, but you probably know better, because there's quality. How much focus do you spend on answering the question, does the system do what we need it to do? And did you ever find yourself coaching people to, we have to know that it works correctly?
Yeah.
Was that an issue with that?
Yeah, it's a great point. The role of test in my mind has always been twofold, right? Find the problems and then also kind of give a measurement of, or confidence of, hey, what is there? Is it working?
Right.
But with quality, I think it's thinking through a variety of things. And one example would be sometimes we have an idea for a feature that we don't know if the customer even cares about this feature. So how would we approach that? Apart from a feature that we know is very valuable, we bank a lot of our revenue on, how do we approach quality for that? And let's say we want to modify or change, refactor some of the technology for that valuable thing, versus we have something that's more speculative. So thinking through, hey, what standards are we going to apply and how are we going to attack this one? I'll tell you, I don't care about unit tests for that thing. We want to get out there and just see if the customers even care about it. On the second, I'm going to probably question and say, hey, we really need to make sure this is absolutely solid and every permutation is tested and all of of that. So that's one example of, I think, we can think through the different practices based on the context of what it is we're trying to deliver.
Then you're doing the validation as well as the verification. The validation would be building the right thing. Does the customer want it?
Right. And do we build it right? And are we building the right thing?
Right. Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Yes.
I just had a question. Have you run into a scenario where, I mean, not all changes, there's a lot of well-formed ideas, obviously, continuous improvement come from the very beginning or the very end. But in a lot of orgs that I've seen, the product owner and the feedback from the customer and the indications or perceptions they have about change they want to introduce seems to be higher weighted than probably any other representative group saying we need to implement this change or this is what we're seeing and we need to do that. So even though we have a really good idea, it may conflict with what this direction or this roadmap is coming from the product owner group platform. Have you found any techniques to either, is it just by that partnering with them the strongest in terms of understanding maybe preemptive where they're going with things, or does that factor in from your experience?
Yeah, if I let me restate just to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 things we could do,
right.
And often the things that come from customers have a higher weight than maybe some of the internal improvements that we want to make, for example.
Right.
And how do we make that balance?
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of things that I've seen in my experience. One is to actually explicitly put some buckets of work at the beginning of the year, and this is where it's important, like at the beginning of the year and set your annual goals, to put your work into 3 buckets. One is growth for the customers. So we're going to do a lot of work to satisfy the customers and make them happy and acquire new customers. This is for the domains that I'm working in. Second is we're going to do a lot of work to support our existing customers. And so, you know, if existing customers have bugs or enhancements or there's performance improvements that we need to make, we'll do that. And then the third is reducing our tech debt, or enhancing our technology for the future. Because if we don't invest in our technology 5 years from now, we're going to be out of business.
Yeah.
So we try to get the team to think in terms of, okay, how much of our efforts are we going to put into these 3 buckets? Maybe we want to do, 60, 20, and 20. And you talk about, have that conversation at the beginning of the year. And that kind of helps us say, okay, we're already doing 60% for our customers. Let's invest 40% or even 20% to make our technology and our processes more sustainable. Second is, and this is, I don't know how relevant this argument is, but I've made it. And if you look at a standard P&L, you have your revenue minus cost of goods sold minus the R&D expenses to get it done leaves your profit.
Right.
And so often we'll say, hey, if we implement this feature, we'll make X number of sales lifting the top line. So many P&Ls, if you look at the cost to actually deliver that stuff is about 25% of sales. Let's say 25% is a number.
Okay.
That means for every dollar you save in your engineering productivity, you earn $4 worth of revenue because you have that multiplier. You would need to make $4 in extra sales to get the same level at your bottom line. Now, I don't know, that's kind of, my boss used to call that GM math, general manager math.
Right.
But, you can make that argument that, hey, being more efficient does allow us to deliver quicker, higher velocity, which may help us build that top
Or
line.
even the ability to scale in the direction the business needs to go with customer support. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. But and you'll hear the pushback. So, well, if we don't deliver these features, we won't have the customers. And so, but it's obviously a balance. And I think the more powerful argument is that first one, which is where we are in our life cycle. A startup is going to be 100% on customer acquisition and less about tech debt maintenance. Versus a more mature company, it's going to be more about sustainable business and profitability, which does include keeping your technology fresh and your processes.
So I think you painted a full circle there of the quality management system that includes non-functional requirements, and that is part of the overall quality fabric. So yeah, I see where you're going. Thanks.
Cool. What else? All right. Good. Thank you very much.
General Roberto from Concur. Very cool presentation. You know, I had the same take. One of my favorite things with that was the same thing that Matt pointed out, was the quality leader instead of the test manager.
Yeah.
Very cool. We've all been ordained. We're now quality leaders. All right, so we have a door prize, and the tradition is that the speaker picks the card, and this was an entertainment book for 2017, but you can start using it right away. So, the winner is
John Ruberto.
Is it?
Kevin Lee.
So thanks for coming. And, if you get a chance to go down to PNSQC, it's really a worthwhile deal. It's a neat trade show that's in our field. And Quardev presents every year. You're going to be speaking.
Yeah. Can I just say PNSQC? So I've been there about 7 or 8 times now. It's my favorite conference for several reasons. One, it's about software quality. It's about that whole life cycle, not just purely testing. Second is, I'm going to say, I'll be declarative and say all of the speakers are practitioners. And so you get very few commercials from tool vendors and such that are masquerade as a topic. And then the third is all of the presentations are backed up by a peer-reviewed paper. So I find that the material is well thought out already and before the presentation. So I really like that conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have fellow presenters here. PNSQC, yeah. So this is becoming the PNSQC of Seattle conference, isn't it? Anyway, thanks everyone for coming.